Christians, don't play Baldur's Gate. It has mind flayers, which are Cthulhu's, which is bad and evil. I saw the E3 trailer, okay? It's bad. Watch out. That's it? Not even one Cthulhu mind flare boy in here? What even is the whole point of Baldur's Gate then? I thought Baldur's Gate was all about mind flayers. Hello, I'm Noah Price, your Christian gamer, here to hopefully bring some awareness to the RPGs and JRPGs games that we play, and just be aware of some things that are in the games, or maybe just learn more about the games we consume. Today we're talking about Baldur's Gate, probably the biggest or well-known CRPG, computer RPG, basically Dungeons & Dragons tabletop video game. If it's not the most known, it's at least the one that has probably the biggest cult following at the very least. Personally, I can't say that I am a cult follower in this game. I'm a Christian, so that'd be weird to say I'm a cult follower. This is not a game I ever played or acquired. I hadn't even heard of the game until Baldur's Gate 3 was announced on E3. That's literally the first time I ever heard of the franchise as a whole. And it still took much later to find out that it was a Dungeons & Dragons campaign setting style game, a CRPG, and a big one for that matter. I didn't realize how long people have been waiting for a third installment of this franchise. But as a Christian who is actually fine with D&D for the most part, within the right ramifications, I was interested into finding out what is so special about Baldur's Gate. And while jokes inside of that first part of, I didn't actually go out of the way and say, oh, it's Cthulhu stuff, watch out. If anything, I was more interested because of the focus on mind flayers or Cthulhu's in the trailer for Baldur's Gate 3. It seems like not until like a couple years ago, the idea or the focus on Cthulhu and that mythos and that belief, or that cult belief, seemed to not even be present in any games or media. I was interested into seeing what some people would construct with a narrative focusing on mind flayers and within that Cthulhu mythos. But as I journeyed through Baldur's Gate 1, I quickly learned that's not quite the case at all. If anything, Baldur's Gate 1 is known for being the more grounded of the adventure tales. From what I've heard, the second game is actually where it starts to get more high fantasy. I actually didn't have a problem with that while playing Baldur's Gate 1. While Baldur's Gate 1 is within the D&D Forgotten Realms campaign setting, I believe the lack of high fantasy elements actually played a strong point to the focus of its main story point. But that's not to say that this game is for everyone. Right off the bat, I have to say the game makes it clear through its cinematic at the beginning. Right off the bat, it shows you the main villain, and he literally, it's a cutscene of him killing somebody. And that right off the bat made me worried. Now, whether the creators wanted to or not, I would not say that this is a high violence, gory game. It is, but because of the lack of graphics, you can't really tell. While in D&D mechanics, there is a feature called bludgeoning, and so it's basically if you're going to kill someone or an enemy, a creature, a monster, and if you're going overboard, it can be gruesome. This game has that, but again, with the graphics, it's actually not so bad. I have found it. And again, beyond that first cutscene, you don't get a lot of elements that's actually really gruesome. Even though the main focus is going around venturing, doing small quests here and there until you're trying to solve the main plot, which is a mystery. Through that, you're doing a lot of killing that happens in this fantasy world of D&D. But Baldur's Gate 1's plot does follow basically the idea of a deity called Baal, him dying, or he has died, and his offsprings through them have almost a deity power to them through their bloodline. If they do a lot of violence and killing, then they could use that power to actually basically make Baal come back. And that's kind of the main plot of the story. And while there's some twist to it, I thought it was actually a good story. A secular one for sure. Going into the gameplay side of things just briefly, I really enjoyed the gameplay. While I didn't pay too much attention to being really specific in what I did, I usually did kind of play it back and just let my crew just do all the work and just auto-played it and just hope for the best. One thing though, because Baldur Gate is an old game, it is hard. I'm playing through the enhanced edition on the Nintendo Switch, and with that has multiple difficulties. If you're just starting out, just play story mode. Just do it. Just do it. I started off on not story mode, and I went through it beginning, and a lot of characters died really quick, and I was struggling for a bit. And then I looked into it a little bit. I still tried to stay blind, because I always try to stay blind when I play these games. But I did learn that, hey, it's an old game. Don't feel bad doing story mode. So I switched to story mode, and it was much better. And it actually was a really more enjoyable experience. I will say, while it is within the D&D, but on video game side of things, it still does kind of feel limited. It's not the same experience as doing D&D. I would for sure say that. While like leveling up and using spells are all the same, which is good. Whenever you take D&D and put it in a video game, you lose the lack of full creative motives and choices. While the game does bring choices, and that's actually something that the creators were influenced by, well, surprisingly, not just D&D, but through making the game, they were actually inspired by the game called Wasteland when they were making the game, just to take the approach of when solving a problem, give more options than one, which is great for D&D specifically. That's the whole point, is you want to be more creative and want to allow the character to not feel restricted. Yes, it's hard to do that in a video game, especially way back in 1998. But even with the restrictions, it still felt very fun and very enjoyable. There's only really 2 discussion points I want to bring up in this video that came from this game. One of them technically isn't fully connected to the game, but I think it's still worth just discussing and talking. Again, while these videos are technically reviews, they're really just opportunities for me to get to talk about different topics. The very first one has to do with just talking about the lore that's within this game. There's a weird fissure of the lore within Baldur's Gate that I kind of found out while playing the very first game. And that has to do is, if there's really any problems you have with this game's story and what it says and any secular things, that's mostly just has to do with the D&D setting, because it is within the setting of Forgotten Realms. That whole story setting, a lot of the cosmology and lore in that is connected here in a lot of ways. I did try to narrow down my search just by focusing on Bahail, just because he is kind of a main focus in this story, and even within the second one and some of the more cider stuff. Like, one thing that really popped up in lore was the existence of his ruling. Like, he had different realms that he ruled, and one of them was the world called, or the realm called, Gehenna. As Christians, that stands out pretty quickly, because that is a term that's used in the Bible and in many different things and cultures. It's used. For a lot of people, the word Gehenna is an interchangeable word for hell or Hades. While that's not always the case, especially nowadays, the exact definition of a Gehenna at this point is, it's called the state or place of misery. So it's not even necessarily you have to be in hell. You could be in Gehenna nowadays, just being in a state of misery. In Baldur Gate's lore of Gehenna, this place is a coexisting plane of lawful evil and neutral evil, that coexisting together. Face value, that's like, oh yeah, that's the hell of places. At least the mainstream knowledge of hell. The worldly view of hell is not necessarily exactly biblical. It's kind of strayed away into its own thing, but like, that's what we would see and be like, ah, okay, I know what you're going for. Which, that whole circumstance is an interesting topic in itself, because even when looking at Gehenna and its actual like word term in Greek, it's a word used, and yes, it is kind of pointed towards depicting as what hell is, or that state is, but Gehenna is actually a literal place in the world. Gehenna is literally a valley outside of Old Jerusalem, a smoldering garbage pile. And it's used a lot of times in Bible as references as to the parallelisms to hell. But the idea of what actually hell is and compared to this worldview is really meant for a different video, not really for this. My main focus when looking into Bahail though was its name, Bahail. It's very similar to Baal, which is a Canaanite god that we see frequently in the Bible. When researching though, I honestly didn't find anything that was connecting the two. The only thing that I can see as a stretch is maybe they know Baal from the Bible as being a bad thing because it's a pagan god. And so like, oh, cool, we'll do it similar here. Because there is always like a little comparison of Baal to Baal that's in Diablo, that game franchise. There's a comparison there, so that's my stretch of knowledge, is maybe if there is any connection to the Bible, that might be where it's from, but it doesn't correlate because the Canaanite god Baal is actually connected with fertility. It's the fertility god, while in this, Baal is literally like, it's called the Lord of Murder. So yeah, not the same. The second discussion point that I kind of want to talk about because of Baldur's Gate 1 is the idea of immortality. A kind of story thread throughout the story I already kind of mentioned has to do with the deity who's dead, Baal, and through his death, he has basically a lineage of generations of a bunch of different kids, and through them they can do a certain act which will then bring him back. And so it's used, that usage, for immortality. And while I did try to do research and couldn't really find the exact origins or a possible correlating origin to this, what I did find and made me think of is actually the different types of immortality, how that is real today. Because I don't think I need to say that, but the idea in this game of immortality is not a real thing. It's not a real thing. But what is actually a real mindset of immortality? Does it exist today? It kind of does. People we'll talk about it. So what I'm talking about is the symbolic immortality. This is actually the real world immortality, or the usage of it today, or the mindset, really. There's 4 types of it, and one of them technically I follow, technically, and another one actually is the closest relating one to actually this game's character, Baal. The very first one that like correlates with me, technically, is the theological / religious symbolic immortality. This is basically the mindset acquired through the idea that you believe in a afterlife. So as a Christian, we believe when we die, if we have committed our life to Christ and we said yes to his gift that he is our Lord and Savior, that he came down and died for us, if we believe in that, we have his salvation, we are a Christian. If we die, we go to heaven. Through that, we technically have immortality. While specifically the definition is really we have a second life, we die once, second life. Even if that's the thing, it does technically correlate with the idea of, well, I'm not really dying, I'm still immortality. That's how that one works. The next two are somewhat, in some regards, possibly similar to each other, and that is, well, the second one is creative symbolic immortality. This second one is through the process of creating some kind of artwork, or really just some kind of material act that has benefit or moved somebody, people, and impacted people, allows them to keep moving on. They don't really die. And I've met people who that is their goal in life, to make some kind of invention or make some kind of impact in the world that they won't be forgotten. And through that, then they'll technically not really die. This is still following the mindset that you truly die once nobody remembers you. The third one is symbolic immortality of nature. And so this is through contributions through /nature / through the embodiment of knowledge. Through your contribution of knowledge from one person to another, through that you have immortality. And finally, the very last one, which is the one that's closest to Baal, closest I say, is the biologic symbolic immortality. Basically, this is the literal, through my generations of children, and that's just associating yourself within the tribe of family and generations. Through that, you don't die off. So as long as the family name keeps going, you have immortality. That kind of mindset. I thought it was interesting finding these for real world immortality mindsets. I believe a lot of people, in some regards, follow this and believe this. Baldur's Gate 1 doesn't have a lot of things that I would say is harmful or bad for a Christian to play. There's not really too much language problems. There's only a few times that there was actually real cussing. Well, yes, there's actually threats of violence because you're versus a lot of villains who normally, in stories, villains wish for your death. Wow. There's not really sexual things in this game, which is great. And so in general, beyond the violence, which even that, it's like, if you're going to play this game, of course there's going to be violence, so that's not really a discussion point. But in general, there's nothing in this game that I would say is bad for a Christian to play. I think it's an interesting story, and I think it's an enjoyable time to play this game. One thing I didn't mention before, but one of the main focus of Endings, while I was really looking forward to Mind Flayers to see how they interact with the story, what they had instead did blow my mind, and I wasn't expecting it, and I really loved and how they used it in the storytelling. If you do want to play this game, look forward to that. It's quite enjoyable. As always, thank you so much for watching this video. It means so much, really does. Whether you're a Christian or non-Christian, you don't have to be a Christian to watch my content. That's always I think that's clear. Hopefully it is. But if there is a game you want me to play, always leave it down in the comments. Trust me, I will play them. I'll do it. I am more RPG focused, but every 5 episodes or game reviews, I cover a non-RPG game. And so that really allows me to do what I want. And so in the end screen right now, you're seeing it's Magic the Gathering. That's our first non-RPG game, and people are liking it. So yeah, leave down your suggestions if you have any. But that's it for today. Game where you versus one player for the traditional format, and they have some more other formats which we'll talk about later. But if you want